Miss Julie, that expression you had was wonderful. Because that thing started, you were like, how do I sing to that? You know? And of course, my expression was probably equally the same. Like, that's not 4. I pressed 4. I thought I did. Yeah, today I'm going to talk about missionaries. I'm going to focus on Brother Miller because really he's the only missionary I really know. You know, he's told me a lot of things. When I first met Brother Miller, it was about doing some work for him. I met him up here at the little restaurant up there at the state line. And he said, I'm going to be there eating. I spoke to him over the phone. I was supposed to meet him at his house, but when I finally was able to get a hold of him, he said, I'm at the little restaurant fixing to eat some lunch. Would you like to meet me there? So I said, sure. And I drove up, ordered a cup of coffee, and sat down there with him. And 4 hours later, I was heading to his house to look at some gutters. Yeah, but he's something. If you ever have an opportunity to just sit with him one-on-one and visit, believe me, the time just flies by. It's amazing. He has some very interesting stories. One of the Bible colleges or Bible universities that he has set up over in Fiji and Papua New Guinea has a plaque on the wall, on the exterior wall, a huge plaque, and on it has Ephesians 6 and 17. So I looked up Ephesians 6 and 17, and it says, take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. And you think about that, the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit. And Brother Miller was born in 1948, and he was one of 4 children. He had 2 brothers and a sister, and yeah, he was born in East Texas, lived over in East Texas area, and his mother came in one day, and I know some of these stories y'all have heard from him when he was up here, but he walked in the house one day, and he was just like 3 years old, and his mother said, well, children, your daddy's been relocated. And to a 3-year-old, he said he just looked and went, what do you mean daddy's been relocated? What's wrong with daddy? A 3-year-old has no idea about being shipped to a different place or, given a different job somewhere else. So he's sitting there about to cry and what's wrong with daddy? And that's when they moved to South Louisiana. And they were down, I believe he said it was like 75 miles south of New Orleans. Right down, I think it's Lafourche, right on the tip. And they mined, actually sulfur, Louisiana. And it's called sulfur because they mine sulfur down there. And that's where they were relocated to. So as far south as you can possibly go in Louisiana, that's where he was, from 3 years of age up. And when he was 5 years old, he made his first trip to a church. And, he said it was interesting. They were sitting around, and one Sunday morning, his mom said, okay, kids, you're going to get dressed and go to church. And he said, do what? She said, we're going to church. He said, we've never done that before. Why? And, sounded like a typical young man, young boy, just full of questions. Why are we going to church? We've never done that before. But he said he went to the church, and he said, oh man, he walked in that church, and it just opened his eyes up, and he looked around, and man, it was a whole new world to him. And he said the thing he remembers when he left the church is he's heading out. He said, Mama, are we going back? And she said, yeah, we're going back every week. And he said he was just filled with joy that he was going back to church every week. He said he just loved it, And he grew up down there. When he was 15 years old, he felt the urge that he was being called to preach at 15. And he said, no. He said, I'm going to grow up to be a welder or a mechanic or something, but I'm not growing up to preach. I'm not going to preach. And he fought it for 2 years, and at the age of 17, he surrendered to the ministry. He went to, and y'all, I don't mean any disrespect by this when I say this, but this is from him, not from me. So I personally don't know it, but he said, you know, he went off to Bible college to learn more about the Bible, and he said that's done more to ruin more preachers than, you know, good, in his opinion. Now, he said, you know, that's just what, but he did meet his wife there, Miss Jeannie, and they married, and after 5 years of marriage, his daughter was born to him. And, you know, during that period, he had heard about Papua New Guinea, and he knew that he needed to go to Papua New Guinea to bring the word over there. But, you know, he was in the BMA, attending the BMA church, and he approached them about going to Papua New Guinea for mission work. And they turned him down. They said, no, we have mission fields elsewhere, and we would certainly entertain the thought of helping you to get into a missionary field somewhere else. He said, but that's not what I'm called. He said, I'm not called to go to, you know, any other area. He said, I feel the call to go there. And they said, no, you just have to take care of yourself and do whatever you want to do. So they left him out the cold. And one thing I've learned in talking to him is he's not a quitter. He's definitely a fighter. And Brother Miller, you know, he thought about it. He talked about it. He didn't grow up with a father who was a preacher, who knew other preachers. And he said one thing about the industry, and, you know, one of the sad parts to it is, you know, a lot of making it in the ministry is who you know. But, you know, it's that way in life in general, isn't it, really? You know, a lot of time it's who you know out there. It's not what you yourself are doing. But he got out there and he got to talking to various preachers, told them what he felt, told them where he wanted to go, and they're like, well, why don't you go get your own sponsors? And he said, hey, that's an idea. But he also, when he surrendered to the ministry, he prayed to God. He said, God, I'm going to do this, but I don't want to beg people. I don't want to have to beg to make it. And I don't want to. Well, he didn't. He went out and told people what his thoughts were, what his ideas was, and you know what? The Lord took care of it for him. He started getting churches to sponsor him. One story he tells is he met a preacher. He was preaching in Mississippi. And the preacher said, Brother Miller, I'd like you to come to my church. And he said, I'd love to come to your church. He said, that's one thing about it. If you're a preacher and you're preaching, he said, now I'm going back 40 years. If you're preaching, he said, there's almost always somebody say, hey, why don't you come preach at our church? And so he's at a church in Mississippi, southern Mississippi, preaching, and this guy said, come to our church. Sure, I'll come. Where's your church at? Detroit, Michigan. Now, Brother Miller said, Detroit, Michigan? How am I going to get to Detroit, Michigan? And this preacher looked at it and said, Brother Miller, you're talking about going to Fiji. If you can't get to Detroit, Michigan, you're going to have a problem getting to Fiji. So, or Papua New Guinea. And so he was like, you know, you've got a point there. And, you know, he said he made that trip. Yeah, he worked that. Now, he worked, saved up some money, and he made that trip to Detroit, Michigan. And when he made that trip, other doors open. It's amazing, y'all, how when you do stuff, how God opens other doors for you. So, yeah, again, he had studied it. He kind of knew what to expect when he got to New Guinea. And he said it was exactly what he had seen in National Geographic, I guess. Now, I'm putting that in there. He didn't tell me that, y'all. But he did say, you know, when they got there, he and his wife, they got over there. Now, they flew, and they landed in the capital city of Papua New Guinea. They landed there, and then they had to take another airplane, a small plane, and fly from there up to this other area in New Guinea. Then they went from there for hours, like 8 hours, up into the mountains. He said they went up 5,700 feet up into the mountains. So, He said the amazing thing is 40 years ago in Papua New Guinea, there's nothing to do. So when they heard an airplane, these tribesmen, kids, men, women, everybody, they headed to the airport. They'd hear a plane coming, they'd know it's coming to that village. And man, they came from all over the place to watch the airplane land. They didn't know who was there, they didn't know who was coming in, but they watched to see the plane land, watched it take off, and then they dispersed. And he said, sure enough, you know, they flew down, whoa, landed, and there's all these people out there just staring at them. And he said these people are standing around, men wearing basically like a loincloth, except it was a piece of bark. It wasn't fur. It was a piece of bark from a tree that was tied around it. And they decorated up with leaves and stuff. And he said the women were, like you saw, like a young man would look at National Geographic magazine, bare-breasted women walking around with little grass skirts like deals. He said it truly was that primitive, yes, excellent. It was that primitive. And kind of like even now, Brother Walter's sharing that email. He is probably in a tent with a bare floor, and the rats are in there eating his clothing, eating his shoes and stuff. It's still primitive in those high altitude areas, high mountainous areas. Now, I'm going to tell you this. Go home, if you have a computer, type in Fiji, and I'm telling you what, the most beautiful picture comes up, and it's got clear water out in the bays, clear water. They have the coral is all over. It's gorgeous. It is a beautiful area. I looked at that and I said, no wonder Brother Miller wants to go there. I want to go there. But he's not down in that part of the land. He's up in the primitive areas. And of course, his daughter was born after they were married for 5 years, and then doing his work over there, you know, as many of y'all know, he lost his wife to a car accident. And a lot of people, a lot of his preacher friends and stuff said, Brother Miller, why are you going back? You know, he brought her back home, buried her, had a funeral. He was brokenhearted, obviously. And, you know, friends are saying, why would you go back? Why did you go there to begin with? Why did you keep preaching? And do you keep preaching? God gets into you, and if he truly gets into you, you're going to do what he wants you to do. And that has become a part of Miller's family. I sit here at his house one evening, y'all, and I promise you, one of the things I love about Brother Miller is he's real. I love a real person. And Brother Miller sit there, and he was told that he couldn't go back. Last year he had the stroke. Several of y'all know about stroke he had. He sat there crying at his house, tears running down his face. He wanted so bad. The day before he had the stroke, or the day after he had the stroke, he was supposed to be flying out. So yeah, he was all set to go. He was packed, and he's in the hospital. And they're telling him, you just had a stroke. You can't do anything. And it broke his heart. You know, this man lives to do God's work. He lives to do what he does over there. And I'll tell you why. He personally started in Fiji and Papua New Guinea 7 churches. Now that's what he did personally. As a result of those 7 churches, they have 127 churches over there. You know, he worked on this one. He worked with the men. They became preachers, pastors. He is steadily working with these people. And when this one becomes a preacher, what's he going to want to do? He's going to want to preach at his own church. That's what they want to do, is get the word out over here. So it just grows. We as Christians, we're supposed to touch our neighbors. We're supposed to talk to our neighbors. Hey, you know, do you go to church? Let me rephrase that. I fail a lot because I'm not near the Christian I should be. I should be talking to people all the time about it. I tried to be the Christian I should be, but I fall short. People who work around me know I go to church. They know I'm a Christian. Sad to say it, in the construction industry, sometimes you get irritated a lot. And a lot of things frustrate you. When you get frustrated, you don't always talk like a Christian. And that's something I've been trying to work on for years and years. And the only thing that keeps me sane, I guess, is the Lord Jesus Christ. He keeps me going. But Brother Miller, they have 127 individual churches over there. Then 2 Bible colleges. You know, you think, well, that's plenty enough. That's all you need to have. Now they have 8 Bible institutes in this country. He worked in Papua New Guinea for 20 years, in Papua New Guinea. And then the Lord called him to carry his work on over to Fiji. Now, I know this is not really good, but this, if you look at the map that you have, and you kind of put things into perspective, that green tip that you see pointing up on your bulletin, that green tip is this tip right here. That's Australia. Straight above Australia is New Guinea. And that's Papua New Guinea. To the eastern portion of it is Papua New Guinea. Now, if you come on over to the right, you can see the Solomon Islands and such. Over to the right is the island of Fiji. And the only thing I can figure is he must have got there by boat. I have not discussed that with him. I always thought that Fiji was just right there, but he had to have traveled by boat, I would assume, from there to Fiji. And that's where he worked for the last 20 years. He's been in Fiji working. And so a lot of these 127 churches and colleges and such are between the 2 islands, between the 2 of them. Papua New Guinea is a country that covers the eastern half of the island of New Guinea. Its offshore islands extend to Melanesia, which is a region in the Pacific Ocean. Papua New Guinea has a land area of 462,840 square kilometers. Somebody has Google, you can break that down into square miles. I meant to, but I didn't get to it. But the amazing thing to me is that little island has 8.2 million people on that island. Its capital city is Port Moresby, and the country is culturally diverse, and its population speaks over 800 indigenous languages. 800 languages. Now here's something else. Brother Miller, he went over there and couldn't speak a word of their language. Think about it. He was from South Louisiana. What did he talk? Probably Cajun. So he got over there. He said at the airport they sold a book, one of those little handbooks that you could purchase that teaches you how to speak the languages. Well, he bought that little book. It cost him $7.50. Bought the book, went down there, and he said it didn't help him a bit. He got out and he started speaking to these people. So what he did was he got his wife, he got her a home, a place to live. Then he went up into the mountain. He spent 30 days in the mountains. And at the end of that 30 days, he was speaking that language fluently. After 8 months, he was able to read and write as well as speak the language. Now, that's why I say he's not a quitter. So you take somebody that's got the determination, you can do these things. He's living proof that you can do it if you put your heart into it. Now, 14 years ago, he met Ms. Naomi and married her. And as several of us know, what does she have, Gail?
Autistic.
Okay, she's autistic. And I'm telling you what, she is so different from Brother Richard, but she is so neat. She came out to her house, and I have a little fish pond in the backyard, a little koi pond. And my daughter, at that time, Lisa, was at the house, and we mentioned the pond. And well, she actually saw something. She said, "What is that out there?" And I said, "Oh, that's the koi pond." And she's like, "Can I go out?" We said, "Sure, go out and look at it." So I'm visiting with Brother Miller, and she and Lisa went out to the pond. And Gail looks out. She had grabbed her dress and hiked her dress up around her knees, and she walked right out into that pond. Now, I didn't care that she walked in the pond. That didn't bother me at all. But I was so afraid that she would step on some of that slime in there and slip and fall. But she didn't. But that's what I was worried about. I was worried that she was going to do that. But she didn't. And so all was well. I worried over nothing. Gail was sitting there freaking out over nothing, you know. But she's wonderful. I love her. And I know Brother Miller loves her to death as well. Now, he just went over, he's been over there, and he's having the problem with the rats. But he also has an issue. He took the flu or something. And he's been feeling puny and kind of sickly. So let's pray for him about that. You know, to be that far away from home and to be sick, it's got to be terrible. It has to be terrible. One of his trips, he was over there, he was working, and you fly from Papua New Guinea, you fly from Papua New Guinea to Australia, you change airplanes in Australia and then resume your journey. And he had landed at Australia and had a heart attack. And fortunately, it happened there. Had it happened back in Papua New Guinea, he probably wouldn't be with us. But he had the heart attack in Australia, and they said, "You can't fly. If you've had a heart attack, you're forbidden from flying for a period of time." And he's like, he's stuck there. Fortunately, you know, being in the preaching business, he did talk around. He attended some churches, and he still, I mean, immediately got right back resuming his preaching duties and stuff, because the man feels like he's got to be preaching no matter what. And I believe that's part of that missionary / preacher culture. If you're doing it, you're doing it. You got to do it, and he does it all. He gives us all. Now, Fiji is a Melanesian country. It's located in the South Pacific, and it's the word for it is archipelago of more than 300 islands. And Fiji covers an area of 18,270 square kilometers, which that tells you is quite a bit smaller than Papua New Guinea. Now, I told Gail, I said, one of the pictures I saw of Fiji was just phenomenal. This guy was in a pool. There was a little resort back from the beach, and this is why I said, I want to go there. There's this, they're huts. I guess, decorated up fancy looking huts. But they had a pool coming from the hut out toward the water, and it was quite wide, but it was glass. The wall on the pool was glass. You could see the entire person's body in the water up on in that pool. And then they're sitting there in the pool, leaning against the side, looking out over the ocean. And I said, man. And that's why I said, I think I could like Fiji. That's one of the things. Now, y'all, here's something else. Brother Miller went there, he and his wife went there, and he knew what to expect. I told you, they got off the airplane, they looked around, there's people just really primitive looking. I mean, still primitive. They still do the face paints and stuff. They still, you know, up in the mountains, it's still pretty rough. The Western civilization has got to them. Most of them now do wear clothing. They do wear shirts, pants, shoes, you know. They have access to most all these things. And my mind just went blank. That's a problem with getting 58, 59 years old. You forget what you're fixing to say. But, okay, the culture. Brother Miller said that he knew what to expect. He had researched it a little bit, and he knew what to expect, so it did not shock him. But what did shock him was he spent 5 years in Papua New Guinea, up in the mountains with these primitive people, and after 5 years he got on a plane, he and his wife came back home, and what shocked him was what had happened to the United States in that 5 years. Folks, he said, in that 5 years, he saw how Christianity had regressed here in this country. Now, the bigger shock to him was when they went back over. He said he was over there for another 10 years. And when he came back in 10 years later, he started crying. He said when he saw how Christianity in America had become, he started crying. That's sad. He now goes to various churches around here, and he sees the same thing he sees at Eastside Baptist Church in Spring Hill, Louisiana. Not many people. He said he goes to these churches that used to boast 100, 150, 200 people, and they're half of what they used to be. I remember coming to Eastside Baptist Church one Sunday morning. Our attendance here was about 105, maybe 110. We don't have that now. Brother Miller walks into the streets in Papua New Guinea. He can literally walk down the street and stop and start speaking to somebody, and they will start walking up. And he said within 10 minutes, it's nothing to have 110 people standing around him listening to him talk in the streets. When he goes to church Sunday mornings, every church is packed. Folks, you know, the only way I can describe how he probably feels, I've listened to him. I see the pictures that he shows me of the churches packed and him speaking. He has to feel like a rock star. Don't you think? I mean, how can you go to every time you walk up into the church, all these people, and as he said, they tell him, we come to hear you, Brother Miller. We come to hear you preach. He preaches for 2 hours. He preaches for 2 hours, and they look at him puzzled and say, what's wrong? Are you not feeling good? Are you sick? He says, why are you asking me, am I sick? Well, because we came to hear a whole message. If he preached to us for 2 hours, he's not coming back. Now, a story he did tell. He preached up in Arkansas. A church that was sponsoring him. A church that he preached at in the past. He went up there. He had come back from Papua New Guinea, and he was all revved up, which he's always all revved up. But he went to this church, and he preached for 55 minutes. At the end of the preaching, on his way out, one of the deacons come up to him and said, what's wrong with you? And he said, what do you mean, what's wrong with me? And he said, this guy looked at him and said, I think you've been in the islands too long, Brother Richard. And he said, what do you mean? You can't preach here for no 55 minutes. People will not come back if you preach for 55 minutes. The islands have affected you. And he said, brother, I haven't changed. You've changed. He said, he called the guy by name. He said, you've changed. He said, we're supposed to preach. And for 55 minutes to preach, and you're going to chew me out for preaching too long? There's something wrong with that picture. And he went out and explained to him a little tidbit. He said, you know, when I lived in South Louisiana, we had cockroaches. He said everybody had cockroaches. He said, and the thing about cockroaches is you leave your house, you go somewhere and do something. He said, we didn't leave the house very often. Remember that. 40 years back, you didn't leave the house very often. But when they did leave the house and come back, what happened? If you turn the lights on and you have any cockroaches, what happens?
They're everywhere.
They scurry, don't they? He told this fella, he said, I'm telling you right now. He said, you remind me of that. He said, because I came here and turned on the light and y'all started scurrying. He didn't make a friend that day. But I'm telling you what, that's why I said he's real. He's going to tell you what he's thinking. And I love it. That's what I love to hear about him preaching. He doesn't mince words. He's not politically correct, that's for sure. But I do love what he does. That's why this man has been able to spend 40 years over in the islands. Because he's not afraid. Hey, a lesser person would have went over there for what he does, they'd have packed up and left out. As a matter of fact, last year, more than 7,000 missionaries quit. It's hard. It's not easy. When Brother Miller got off the plane over there, when he and his wife got off the airplane, they thought they were going to melt. He said, yeah, it was so hot. It's literally 150 degrees over there in the summer. We think it's terrible at 100, 102. This fat boy is out there going, yeah, it's rough, but it's 150 degrees over there. They had a crew came over to help them do some construction work. He said a bunch of guys, about 8 or 10, came over from the U.S. Big boat up guys. They were going to do some concrete work over there. They got off the plane. Brother Miller says, you need to take a rest. You need to rest up and prepare for this. And they're like, oh, we don't need to rest. We've been on the airplane. We hadn't done nothing. We're ready to go to work. He said they got out there and worked for about 2.5 hours, and every one of them was laying there having a heat stroke. It's hot. It's hard. And they weren't prepared for it. And folks, being a missionary, that's what it is. It's hot, hard work. It takes a lifetime of preparation with a lot of people. Now, I'm sure there are some people that might get that notion and be able to hit it. But a lot of people quit. A lot of people get into it and they quit. But there are those that God's really in them and they make it. I hope I hadn't gone over too long or whatever. But I get talking about this stuff. You see I'm a motor mouth that don't stop. Appreciate it.
Hey Sam, you forgot your sword. Need that sword.
Sure enough.
I appreciate Brother Sam for bringing that message about what the best known missionary that we know is doing and how faithful he has been over there in New Guinea. At this time, I would like to ask the ushers to come forward. We'll take up a special offer just to go to the Miller Ministries, and you can write a check to Eastside Baptist Church. Just don't on the bottom of it, it's going to the Miller Ministries, and Gail will make sure